Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive. Have you ever truly stopped to wonder what really shapes a person and down to their very core?
It's a huge question, isn't it?
It really is. Why does one individual, like, say, the author Alice Walker, overcome just immense hardship, poverty, racism, even a disfiguring injury, to achieve greatness? And then someone else, like Ted Kaczynski, brilliant guy, Harvard, Berkeley, takes such a destructive path.
That contrast.
It gets right to the heart of what makes us human.
Indeed, it's the central, the really enduring question that drives the whole field of child development. And for those of you stepping into, well, the incredibly important world of elementary education, understanding these fundamental forces isn't just, academic curiosity.
No, it's practical.
It's absolutely essential for every single child you'll guide, every day.
Yeah.
It truly shapes how you view their potential, their struggles, and their triumphs in the classroom.
Absolutely. Today, we're embarking on a really comprehensive deep dive into the very nature of child development itself. We'll be drawing from foundational research and key texts that meticulously lay out the processes, the periods, the big issues, and the science behind how kids grow and change. Our mission really is to equip you with the essential framework, that sort of mental toolkit, to truly understand the dynamic and wonderfully complex lives of the young learners you'll meet.
Yeah, and we'll unpack why scientific research in this field is just so incredibly critical. We have to know how we know things.
Right.
We'll explore the main theories that shape our current understanding of children, the big ideas that have emerged over decades, offering different lenses to see your students through.
Different perspectives.
Exactly, and we'll even touch on the specific methods and designs researchers use to gather their data so you can, critically evaluate the information you encounter out there.
So you know what to trust.
Pretty much. Think of this as your shortcut to becoming incredibly well-informed, ready to observe, understand, and most importantly, support every child's unique and evolving journey.
Okay, let's unpack this. We use the word development all the time, right?
Right.
But what exactly does it mean when we're talking about a child? What are we really looking at?
Right. Well, in this field, development is defined pretty precisely. It's the pattern of change
Okay.
that begins right at conception and continues all the way through the lifespan.
The whole life, not just childhood.
Not just childhood. I mean, most people think of it primarily as growth getting bigger, stronger, smarter, that sort of thing.
Sure.
But it also encompasses processes like decay or decline later in life. So it's a continuous, dynamic, multifaceted process. Our focus today is childhood, but it doesn't stop there.
And what's truly fascinating, I think, is that the very idea of childhood itself as this distinct special period that hasn't always been the way people thought, has it?
Not at all. It feels so intuitive to us now, doesn't it? But it's actually a relatively modern concept. Historically, especially if you look back at, say, medieval Europe, the laws often didn't even distinguish between child and adult offenses.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The historian Philippe Ariès, he analyzed art from the period, and he suggested that European societies before 1600 didn't really give any special status to children. You see them in paintings depicted as miniature adults, basically. Same clothes, same activities.
Wow.
Now, it's worth noting his analysis was mostly from aristocratic art, so it might not have reflected everyone's view across all social classes.
Okay, fair point.
But it definitely highlights how culturally determined our views of childhood are and how much they can shift over time.
So before this modern idea of childhood really took hold, what were some of the big philosophical views, the ones that shaped how people thought about kids and, how to raise them or teach them?
Yeah, there were three really significant views that left a major mark. First, you had the original sin view.
Original sin,
Yeah.
okay.
This was particularly prevalent during the Middle Ages. The basic idea was that children were born inherently evil, tainted by original sin.
Oh, dear.
So the main goal of child rearing and education, too, was basically salvation. It was about removing that sin from the child's life.
Which meant strict discipline.
Very strict, often punitive approaches,
Mhm.
focused heavily on breaking the will, instilling obedience.
Right. Then things changed.
Gradually, towards the end of the 17th century, the English philosopher John Locke came along with his tabula rasa view.
Tabula rasa, blank slate.
Exactly, blank tablet. Locke argued that children aren't born good or bad. They start out neutral, like a clean slate.
Okay.
And he believed that childhood experiences are incredibly important in determining adult characteristics. So nurture was key.
So experiences right on the slate.
Precisely. He actually advised parents to spend quality time with their children, to actively shape them, teach them, foster them to become, good members of society.
That's a huge shift. It puts a lot of responsibility on the parents and educators.
It really does. And then in the 18th century, you get Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the French philosopher. He presented the innate goodness view.
Innate goodness. So the opposite of original sin.
Pretty much. Rousseau stressed that children are inherently good, born with a natural inclination toward positive development.
Right.
And because they were basically good, he believed they should be allowed to grow naturally with minimal parental constraint or interference. Trust the child's instincts.
Let them explore, follow their curiosity.
Exactly. A much more permissive approach, really trusting the child's natural path.
It's truly amazing how these old ideas, original sin, blank slate, innate goodness, you can still see echoes of them in educational debates today, can't you? Like how much structure versus freedom.
Absolutely. These philosophical underpinnings are still there. But today, clearly, we view childhood as highly unique, incredibly important. We invest huge resources in care and education.
Child labor laws, juvenile justice.
Right. A stark contrast, really highlighting how far our societal view has shifted towards prioritizing child well-being and development. Now, to really get a handle on how this development actually unfolds, we tend to look at three fundamental processes. They're completely intertwined: biological, cognitive, and socio-emotional.
Like three threads woven together.
That's a great analogy. You can't really pull one thread without affecting the others. They're constantly interacting.
Okay, let's take them one by one. Biological first. What falls under that umbrella? Physical stuff.
Exactly. Biological processes fundamentally involve changes in an individual's physical body. This includes the genes inherited from parents, the blueprint for things like eye color, height potential, maybe even temperament predispositions.
Right.
It includes brain development, which is huge in childhood, the physical gains in height and weight, the development of motor skills, everything from a baby grasping to a child learning to ride a bike.
Getting coordinated.
Yeah. And even the big hormonal changes like those during puberty. That's all biological.
Okay. And then for thinking, learning, understanding the world around us.
That's where cognitive processes come in. These refer to changes in an individual's thought, intelligence, and language.
So like problem solving.
Yes. Think about a child trying to solve a math problem in elementary school, or putting together a two-word sentence, or learning new vocabulary words and figuring out how to use them.
Memorizing facts, imagining things.
All of that, even imagining what it would be like to be, say, an astronaut. That's cognition at work. It's how the mind processes, understands, and uses information.
Got it. And finally, the third thread, how we interact with others, how we feel, our personalities. This seems super important for the classroom.
Absolutely critical. Those are socio-emotional processes. These involve changes in an individual's relationships with other people, changes in their emotions, how they express them, understand them, manage them, and the development of their personality.
So for an elementary kid, this could be what? Making friends?
Making friends, learning to cooperate in a group project, managing frustration when they lose a game on the playground.
Dealing with anger or sadness.
Exactly. Developing empathy for a classmate who's upset. Even developing assertiveness, like learning to voice their ideas respectfully. All those social skills and emotional understandings fall under socio-emotional development.
What's really crucial here, and you mentioned it before, is that these aren't separate tracks. They're totally intertwined, right? They influence each other constantly.
Precisely. You can't isolate them. They are constantly interacting, bidirectional. Think about something simple, like a baby smiling at a parent's touch.
Right.
That involves biological processes, the physical sensation of touch, the baby's nervous system responding. It involves cognitive processes, the baby starting to understand maybe that this touch is intentional, it's a positive interaction, and obviously it involves socio-emotional processes. The smile itself is often an expression of positive emotion, and it helps build that connection, that bond with the caregiver.
Okay, that makes sense for a baby. What about in an elementary classroom? How does that interaction play out?
It's happening all the time. Take a child's ability to focus and learn in your lesson. That's largely a cognitive process, right? Attention, memory.
Sure.
But it can be profoundly influenced by how much sleep they got the night before. That's biological. If they're tired, their cognitive function suffers.
Right.
Or maybe they're really anxious about a conflict they had with a friend at recess. That's socio-emotional. That anxiety can completely hijack their cognitive resources, making it hard to concentrate on the math lesson.
So a student acting out or seeming disengaged might not just be misbehaving. There could be biological or socio-emotional factors completely impacting their cognitive ability at that moment.
Exactly. It's always about the integrated whole child. Understanding one aspect often requires considering all three. You have to look beyond just the surface behavior.
Okay, so development is this continuous flow, weaving together these biological, cognitive, and socio-emotional threads. But to make sense of it, developmentalists often break it down into periods, right, like chapters in the story.
Yes, exactly. It helps to have some guideposts. The common periods we talk about are prenatal, infancy, early childhood, middle and late childhood, and adolescence.
Let's walk through them briefly. Prenatal is obvious.
Right. The prenatal period is from conception to birth, roughly 9 months. It's an incredible time of transformation from a single cell to a complex organism with a brain capable of responding to its environment even before birth.
Amazing. Then infancy.
Infancy runs from birth to about 18 to 24 months. This is a time of extreme dependence on adults for literally everything.
Yeah.
But psychologically, so much is starting. The beginnings of language, coordinating senses with physical actions, symbolic thought starts to emerge, imitating others, huge foundational steps.
Now, for our listeners focusing on elementary education, the next 2 periods are really where the action is for them, right? This is their target audience.
Absolutely. These are the core years they'll be working with. First is early childhood.
Preschool years.
Yeah, often called the preschool years. It extends from the end of infancy, around age 2, up to about 5 or 6 years old. During this time, kids gain a huge amount of self-sufficiency. They learn to dress themselves, feed themselves, use the toilet.
Becoming more independent.
Definitely. And crucially, they develop what we call school readiness skills. This isn't just ABCs and 123s, though that's part of it.
What else?
It's things like following instructions, taking turns, paying attention for short periods, recognizing letters, developing those fine motor skills for holding a pencil, and really importantly, learning how to play cooperatively with peers.
So, getting ready for the structure of school.
Exactly. First grade often marks the end of this period, signaling that formal entry into more structured learning.
So early childhood really sets the stage, builds those foundations for what comes next in elementary school.
Precisely. It's all about priming them for success in that next phase, which brings us to middle and late childhood.
The elementary school years proper.
Right. This period aligns directly with the elementary school years, roughly from age 6 to 11. This is the time when children really master the fundamental academic skills: reading, writing, arithmetic, the 3 R's.
The core business of elementary school.
Absolutely. They're also formally exposed to the larger world and its culture through history, science, social studies. Their world expands dramatically beyond home and neighborhood. Achievement becomes a much more central theme. Doing well in school, being good at sports, having friends. These become really important.
And self-control.
Their self-control also increases significantly during this time. They can sit still longer, manage their impulses better, follow more complex rules. They start to understand abstract concepts like fairness, too.
Okay. And after elementary school comes?
Adolescence. This transition usually starts around 10 to 12 years old and goes up to about 18 or 19.
Big changes there.
Huge changes. Rapid physical changes, growth spurts, sexual maturation. The big psychological themes are the pursuit of independence from parents and figuring out their identity. Who am I? They spend much more time with peers outside the family. And cognitively, their thinking becomes more abstract, idealistic, and logical. They can think about possibilities, hypothesize.
Right. It's important to mention, though, as you said earlier, development doesn't just stop at 19, right?
Not at all. Developmentalists today strongly emphasize that development is a lifelong process. We continue to change and adapt throughout adulthood and old age. But for this deep dive, our focus is really conception through adolescence, especially those crucial childhood years for educators.
Okay, thinking about all those shifts and changes across these periods, what are the big, enduring questions or debates that developmentalists wrestle with? The fundamental issues that keep coming up?
Yeah, there are 3 core issues that really frame a lot of the discussion and research in the field. They are nature and nurture, continuity and discontinuity, and the early versus later experience issue.
The nature-nurture issue. That's probably the most famous one, right? Biology versus environment. Genes versus upbringing.
It's definitely the one most people have heard of. The debate revolves around whether development is primarily influenced by biological inheritance, that's nature, or by environmental experiences, nurture.
So which one is it?
Well, almost no one today argues for one extreme over the other. It's widely accepted that it's an interaction.
Okay.
But the emphasis can differ. Some researchers might highlight genetic predispositions. They might point to how a sunflower grows in a very orderly, predictable way unless the environment is terrible. They'd suggest humans have genetically wired tendencies like walking before talking, hitting puberty around a certain age range. Nature provides the blueprint.
Right.
Others really emphasize the profound impact of nurture the environment. This includes everything from the biological environment, like nutrition and medical care, to the social environment, family, peers, schools, community, culture, media. Think about how a child's diet, that's nurture, affects not just physical growth, but also cognitive abilities like thinking and problem solving.
So the context matters hugely.
Hugely. Compare a child raised in extreme poverty with limited resources to one raised with every advantage. Even with similar genetic potential, their environments will likely shape their skills, beliefs, and opportunities very differently.
So the key takeaway for educators is it's always both, interacting.
Yeah.
And you have significant influence over the nurture part in your classroom environment.
Exactly. It's never just one or the other. Which leads to the next big question. How does this change happen? Is it smooth and gradual, or does it occur in big steps or stages?
The continuity-discontinuity issue, like a ramp versus stairs.
That's a perfect way to put it. Continuity describes gradual, cumulative change, like a ramp. Think of a seedling slowly growing into a giant oak. It just becomes more oak.
Okay.
A child's first word might seem sudden, but it's actually the result of months of gradual vocal development, babbling, listening. It looks abrupt, but the underlying process is continuous. Discontinuity, on the other hand, describes distinct stages like stairs. Change here is seen as qualitatively different at each step. The classic example is a caterpillar transforming into a butterfly. It doesn't just become a bigger caterpillar, it becomes a fundamentally different organism.
So in human terms.
Maybe like a child moving from only being able to think about concrete things they can see and touch to suddenly being able to think abstractly about ideas like justice or algebra. Piaget's theory is a famous example of a stage theory, emphasizing discontinuity.
And does this relate to nature-nurture?
Often, yes. Those who emphasize nurture tend to see development as more continuous, gradual learning. Those who emphasize nature often see development unfolding in genetically programmed stages, more discontinuous.
This feels really relevant for teaching. Like, is a child ready for multiplication, discontinuity, or is it about building up lots of smaller addition skills first, continuity?
Exactly. It impacts how we structure curriculum and assess readiness. And that connects to the third big issue. How much do early experiences matter compared to later ones?
Right, the early and later experience issue. Is infancy the critical period that sets your path, or can things change significantly later on?
This debate focuses on whether early experiences, especially in infancy, are the key determinants, the foundation upon which everything else is built, or if later experiences can effectively override or reshape earlier influences.
So the early side would say.
They might argue that if a child doesn't get warm, nurturing care early on, maybe in the first year or two, optimal development just can't happen. The mold is cast early.
And the later side.
Others, like the developmentalist Jerome Kagan, argue that children are actually remarkably malleable throughout development. They believe later positive experiences, good teachers, supportive friends, finding a passion can be just as important, sometimes even more powerful, in shaping who we become.
Kagan found evidence for this.
Yes, he studied temperament.
Yeah.
He found that even infants who were very inhibited and shy, a trait often linked to biology, could become much less so by age 4 if they had supportive environments that encouraged them gently. It suggests change is possible.
That offers a lot of hope, especially for educators working with children who might have had tough starts, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Your influence in elementary school can be incredibly significant, potentially redirecting a child's path.
It's also interesting you mentioned culture plays a role here, too.
Definitely. Western cultures, perhaps influenced by Freud, have often put a huge emphasis on those very early years as being paramount. But many Asian cultures, for example, place greater emphasis on experiences after age 6 or 7. They might believe that's when reasoning skills really develop, making middle childhood a more crucial period for shaping character and intellect.
Fascinating. So how do most developmentalists view these three big issues today? Is there consensus?
The strong consensus now is really an integrated interactionist perspective. Development isn't all nature or all nurture. It's not all continuity or all discontinuity. And it's certainly not all determined by early experiences or completely malleable later.
It's complex.
It's incredibly complex. Nature and nurture, continuity and discontinuity, early and later experiences, they all play interconnected roles throughout life. The debate now is much more nuanced. It's about the degree of influence or how these factors interact in specific situations.
Right.
Like how much do genetics versus societal messages contribute to gender differences we might see in math confidence? Or can really strong, positive experiences in adolescence truly help overcome the negative impacts of early childhood poverty or neglect? The answers have huge implications for social policy and, of course, for educational practices.
Okay, if we're going to tackle these really complex questions about how kids develop, we absolutely need to talk about how we actually study them. Why is scientific research so fundamental here? Why can't we just rely on, our own experiences or what seems like common sense?
That's a critical question. Scientific research is crucial precisely because it aims to provide the most accurate, reliable answers possible. It does this by being objective, systematic, and testable. This approach helps us move beyond personal beliefs, opinions, or just gut feelings, which, let's face it, can often be biased or based on limited experience.
Right. We see things through our own lens.
Exactly. So child development researchers rigorously use the scientific method. It's a structured process, usually involving 4 key steps.
Which are?
First, you conceptualize a problem or a question you want to study. Second, you collect research information or data. Third, you analyze that data, looking for patterns and meaning. And fourth, you draw conclusions based on the analysis, which then helps refine existing theories or even develop new ones.
And theory and hypothesis are central to this process, right? We hear those words a lot.
Absolutely central. Let's clarify them. A theory is basically an interrelated, coherent set of ideas that helps to explain something and make predictions.
Like a big framework.
Exactly.
Yeah.
For instance, a theory about mentoring might try to explain why sustained support from a mentor seems to benefit children from disadvantaged backgrounds. It provides the broad explanation.
Okay. And a hypothesis.
A hypothesis is much more specific. It's a testable assumption or prediction, often derived from a theory. It's usually phrased as an if-then statement.
So, using the mentoring example.
A hypothesis might be, if children from impoverished backgrounds receive consistent individual attention from mentors for 1 year, then they will show significantly higher grades compared to similar children without mentors.
Ah, okay. Specific and testable.
Right. And by systematically testing these specific hypotheses, researchers can gather evidence that either supports or refutes the broader theory, helping us refine our understanding. For educators, this means the teaching strategies or programs you use are often grounded in theories that have survived this kind of rigorous testing. Now, understanding children, as we've said, is super complex. No single theory can possibly explain everything. They each offer different pieces of the puzzle, different perspectives.
So you need multiple viewpoints.
Exactly. That's why many developmentalists adopt what's called an eclectic theoretical orientation. Basically, they don't rigidly stick to just one theory. Instead, they draw upon the best features, the most useful insights from various theories to build a more complete picture.
Makes sense. Okay, let's touch on some of the major theoretical camps.
Yeah.
How about psychoanalytic theories first? Freud and Erikson come to mind.
Right. These theories describe development as primarily unconscious, driven by forces we're not aware of, and heavily colored by emotion.
Unconscious and emotional.
Okay. Psychoanalytic theorists emphasize that what we see, the observable behavior, is just the tip of the iceberg. To truly understand development, you need to analyze the symbolic meanings of behavior, explore the inner workings of the mind. And they strongly stress the crucial role of early experiences, especially with parents.
Freud's stages are famous, but maybe less directly applied now.
Freud's psychoactual stages were foundational, absolutely. But many modern psychoanalytic thinkers have revised his ideas, putting less emphasis on sexual instincts and more on cultural experiences. For practical insights, especially for educators, Erikson's psychosocial theory is incredibly valuable.
How is it different?
Erikson agreed early experiences matter, but he believed development occurs through 8 psychosocial stages across the entire lifespan, not just childhood. And crucially, he argued the primary motivation isn't sexual, but social, a deep desire to connect with other people.
Social connection.
Each of Erikson's stages presents a unique developmental task, or what he called a crisis, not a catastrophe, but a turning point. Resolving each crisis successfully leads to healthier development.
And this connects directly to elementary school, right? Which stages are key there?
Absolutely. 2 stages are particularly relevant and offer profound insights for elementary teachers. First is initiative versus guilt. This happens during the preschool years, roughly ages 3 to 5. Children are encountering a much wider social world. They face new challenges that require them to be active, purposeful, responsible.
So they want to do things.
Yes, they want to take initiative. As a teacher, you want to foster that. Give them freedom to explore, offer choices in activities, provide materials that spark their imagination.
And avoid.
Avoid excessive criticism. Structure activities so they can succeed. They will make mistakes. That's how they learn. But if they're constantly criticized or face tasks that are too hard, they can develop overwhelming guilt and become hesitant to try new things. You need good models and developmentally appropriate tasks. Asking them to sit still for long academic drills can frustrate them and squash that initiative.
Right. Okay. What's the next stage for elementary years?
That's industry versus inferiority, which lines up perfectly with the elementary school years from about age 6 to puberty.
Industry.
Yep.
Like being productive.
Exactly. Children now need to direct their energy toward mastering knowledge and intellectual skills, learning to read, write, do math, understand science. Erickson hoped teachers would create an atmosphere where kids become truly passionate about learning, where they discover they can build things, solve problems, accomplish goals.
Fostering that I can do it feeling.
Precisely. Teachers should challenge students, but not overwhelm them. Be firm about effort, but not overly critical of mistakes. Most importantly, ensure there are lots of opportunities for success for all students. If children consistently experience failure or feel incompetent in school, they can develop deep feelings of inferiority, inadequacy, and might just give up on learning.
So these theories really underscore the emotional side of learning. It's not just about the academics, but about fostering confidence and initiative.
Absolutely, which leads us nicely into cognitive theories, which focus more directly on conscious thoughts and how thinking develops.
Piaget is the big name here, right?
He is. Piaget's cognitive developmental theory is hugely influential. His core idea was that children don't just passively receive information, they actively construct their understanding of the world as they interact with it.
They're like little scientists exploring.
In a way, yes. He proposed this happens through 4 distinct stages. And 2 key processes drive this: organization, making sense of experiences; structuring information and adaptation, adjusting our thinking to fit new information from the environment. Each stage involves a qualitatively different way of thinking.
And again, for elementary teachers, which stages are most relevant in their classrooms?
2 are key. First, the tail end of the pre-operational stage, roughly ages 2 to 7. Children here are using symbols, words, images, drawings. Pretend play is huge.
Right.
But Piaget argued they lack operations, internalized mental actions. They struggle to mentally reverse things. They might think a tall, thin glass holds more water than a short, wide one, even if they saw the water poured, because they focus on the height. They can't mentally compensate for the width yet. Thinking is still quite intuitive, not yet logical.
Okay, then comes
the concrete operational stage, from about 7 to 11 years old. This is the elementary school years. Now, children can perform operations, mental actions, but generally only when applied to real, concrete objects or situations they can imagine vividly.
So they can think logically, but need tangible stuff.
Exactly. They can understand conservation. The amount of clay stays the same even if you change its shape. They can classify objects into sets, like grouping blocks by color and shape. They can order things along a dimension like length, seriation, if they can see it or manipulate it.
This is why hands-on activities and manipulatives are so vital in elementary math and science.
Precisely. They can't yet reason purely abstractly, like with algebraic variables. That comes later in the formal operational stage, around 11-15 onwards, which is more about adolescence.
Okay, Piaget gives us these stages, but there are other cognitive theories, right?
Yes, absolutely. A very important one is Vygotsky's sociocultural cognitive theory.
How does Vygotsky differ from Piaget?
Vygotsky also believed children actively construct knowledge, but he placed a much stronger emphasis on the roles of social interaction and culture. He argued that cognitive development, things like memory, attention, reasoning, can't be separated from social and cultural activities.
So learning happens with others.
Fundamentally, children learn to use the tools of their culture language, counting systems, writing through interaction with more knowledgeable people, adults, and peers.
What does this mean for a teacher?
It means teaching isn't just transmitting info, it's guiding participation in culturally meaningful activities. Facilitate cooperative learning where students learn from and with each other. Recognize that knowledge is often situated and collaborative. When you teach reading, you're not just teaching skills, you're inducting them into a valued cultural practice.
That's a powerful perspective. And there's information processing theory, too.
Right. The information processing theory isn't about stages like Piaget's. It draws an analogy to computers. It focuses on how individuals perceive, encode, represent, store, and retrieve information.
Like input, processing, output.
Sort of. Emphasizes that development involves gradual improvements in processing capacity and the acquisition of more complex knowledge and strategies. A key idea is learning how to process information effectively, like learning strategies for remembering things or monitoring your understanding while reading. This directly applies to teaching study skills and comprehension strategies.
Okay, moving on. What about behavioral and social cognitive theories? What's their main focus?
These theories shift the focus primarily to observable behavior and the idea that development consists of behaviors learned through interactions with the environment. They generally emphasize continuity, gradual learning, rather than distinct stages.
So, learning through experience. Pavlov and Skinner.
Exactly. Pavlov's classical conditioning showed how we learn associations, often involuntary responses. Think of a child developing anxiety about tests response because they've previously experienced failure or pressure associated with tests. Stimulus.
Okay, and Skinner.
Skinner's operant conditioning is hugely influential in education. It focuses on how the consequences of a behavior affect the probability of it happening again. Behaviors followed by rewards are strengthened. Behaviors followed by punishment are weakened.
Reinforcement and punishment.
Right. A teacher smiling at a child after they share, reward, makes sharing more likely. Skinner-beloved development is essentially the sum of these learned behavioral patterns shaped by rewards and punishments. This underpins many classroom management techniques.
But Bandura added something important, didn't he? Social cognitive theory.
Yes, Bandura's social cognitive theory is crucial. He agreed environmental influences are key, but he added cognition thinking back into the picture, alongside behavior and environment.
How so?
His big contribution is highlighting observational learning by watching others, also called imitation or modeling. Children learn a huge amount simply by observing parents, teachers, peers, even characters on TV.
Learning aggression by watching it, or learning helpfulness by seeing it modeled.
Precisely. But Bandura said it's not automatic imitation. People cognitively process what they observe. They think about it, anticipate consequences, develop beliefs about their own abilities, self-efficacy, and then choose whether or not to adopt the behavior. He proposed a reciprocal interaction between behavior, the person, including their thoughts and feelings, and the environment.
So for teachers, this means being very conscious role models, because students are constantly observing and learning from your behavior, your attitudes, how you handle situations.
Absolutely. And understanding how peer modeling works in the classroom is vital too.
Okay. What about theories focusing more on biology?
That brings us to ethological theory. This theory stresses that behavior is strongly influenced by biology, tied to evolution, and often characterized by critical or sensitive periods.
Critical or sensitive periods, times when learning happens easily.
Exactly. These are specific time frames during which the presence or absence of certain experiences has a long-lasting influence. Konrad Lorenz's famous work with imprinting in geese is a classic example. Goslings would follow the first moving object they saw after hatching, usually their mother. This rapid, innate learning is locked into a specific early period.
Do humans imprint like that?
Not in the same rigid way, but John Bowlby applied ethological ideas to humans, specifically to attachment. He argued that infants forming a secure attachment to a caregiver in the first year or so is crucial for later social and emotional development. He viewed that first year as a sensitive period for establishing secure bonds, with potentially lifelong consequences if it doesn't happen well.
So understanding a child's early attachment history can help teachers understand their relationship patterns in the classroom.
Very much so. A child with an insecure attachment might struggle to trust the teacher or form peer relationships.
Finally, there's ecological theory, which seems to try and pull everything together, the big picture.
That's a great way to put it. Ecological theory, most associated with Uri Bronfenbrenner, emphasizes the profound influence of environmental contexts on development. His bioecological theory views the child as developing within a complex system of relationships affected by multiple levels of the surrounding environment.
Multiple levels, like nested circles.
Exactly like nested circles, from closest to furthest out. At the center is the microsystem, the immediate settings where the child lives and directly interacts: family, classroom, playground, peers, teachers. Direct, face-to-face interactions happen here.
Okay, the immediate environment.
Then the mesosystem, This involves the connections between the microsystems.
Yeah.
How does the family experience connect to the school experience? How do peer relationships affect family dynamics?
So parent-teacher communication is part of the mesosystem.
Absolutely critical. A strong homeschool connection is a supportive mesosystem link that benefits the child immensely. Conflict between home and school creates mesosystem tension.
Got it. What's next?
The exosystem involves links between a social setting where the child doesn't have an active role and their immediate context. For example, a parent's stressful workplace. The child isn't there, but the parent's stress comes home and affects interactions within the family microsystem. School board decisions would also be in the exosystem for a student.
Indirect influences?
Right. Then the macrosystem, the broader culture in which the child lives. This includes societal values, laws, customs, economic conditions, political ideologies. Think about cultural attitudes towards education or gender roles or poverty.
The big societal context.
And finally, the chronosystem. This adds the dimension of time. It involves the patterning of environmental events and transitions over the child's life, like parents' divorce, moving house, as well as socio-historical circumstances like living through a recession, changes in technology, or shifts in societal attitudes over decades.
Wow. Bronfenbrenner's theory really forces you to see the child embedded in all these interconnected layers, doesn't it? It's not just the child or even just the family, but this whole complex web.
Precisely. It's a holistic view showing how everything from family interactions to cultural values to historical events shapes development. And educators are key players within several of these systems. So with all these theories offering different perspectives, how do researchers actually gather the data to test them? How do we find out what's really going on with children? There are several core methods.
Observation seems like the most obvious one. Just watching kids.
Well, yes and no. Scientific observation isn't just casual people watching. It has to be systematic. Researchers need to know what they're looking for, who they're observing, where and when they'll observe, and how they'll record the observations in an unbiased way.
Okay. Where do they do this observing?
Two main settings. First, a laboratory. This is a controlled setting where many complex factors of the real world are removed or held constant.
Advantages?
Control. You can isolate variables. For example, if you want to study aggression, you can control exactly what kind of TV show a child watches in the lab.
Disadvantages?
It can feel artificial. Participants might behave differently knowing they're being watched, and lab settings might not attract a diverse range of participants, potentially limiting generalizability.
Okay. What's the alternative?
Naturalistic observation. This means observing behavior in real-world settings, homes, schools, playgrounds, museums, with no attempt to manipulate or control the situation.
So you see behavior as it naturally happens.
Exactly. You get richness and authenticity you can't get in a lab. Remember that museum study? Observing parents naturally interacting with kids around science exhibits revealed that subtle gender bias in how they explain things. You probably wouldn't capture that in a lab setting.
Makes sense. What about just asking people? Surveys? Interviews?
Yep. Surveys and interviews are common. They involve asking participants a standard set of questions about their attitudes, beliefs, or behaviors.
Pros and cons?
Pro. Quick and easy way to get information from lots of people. Con. A big problem is social desirability bias. People might give answers they think are socially acceptable or that make them look good, rather than their true thoughts or feelings. Kids might say they never cheat, even if they sometimes do.
Right. What about standardized tests? Like IQ tests or achievement tests used in schools?
A standardized test is one with uniform procedures for administration and scoring. This allows comparison of an individual's performance with others.
Useful for comparisons, then. Downsides?
Several. Test performance doesn't always predict behavior in real life. They assume behavior is stable, which it isn't always. And a huge issue, especially for diverse classrooms, is that many tests developed in Western cultures might not be fair or appropriate for children from other cultural backgrounds, potentially leading to inaccurate assessments or labels. A test score is just one piece of information.
Important point.
Yeah.
Then there's the really deep dive into one person, a case study.
Right. A case study is an in-depth look at a single individual. It provides a rich, detailed picture of that person's life, experiences, thoughts, feelings. Clinicians often use them for unique cases.
Sounds fascinating.
Limitations. You have to be really cautious about generalizing from a single case. The person is unique, and the researcher's judgments and interpretations might be biased. It gives depth, but not necessarily breadth.
Okay. And finally, looking inside the body. Physiological measures.
Yes, these are increasingly used. This can involve things like measuring hormone levels in blood or saliva, like cortisol for stress, tracking heart rate or eye movements, or using neuroimaging techniques like fMRI.
fMRI, that shows brain activity.
Exactly. It creates images of brain tissue and biochemical activity, helping us understand the biological underpinnings of cognitive processes, emotions, or developmental changes. It offers a window into processes people might not even be aware of.
Okay, so we have these methods for collecting data, but how do researchers design their studies to actually answer specific questions? How do we figure out relationships or causes?
Great question. There are three main types of research designs researchers use: descriptive, correlational, and experimental.
Let's start with descriptive research. What's its main goal?
Simple: to observe and record behavior. Just describe what's happening. For example, a researcher might document the frequency of cooperative play among kindergartners or survey parents about their disciplinary practices.
So it gives you a picture.
Exactly. It provides important information about what behavior looks like, how often it occurs, but it cannot prove what causes the behavior. It just describes.
Okay, so to look at relationships between things.
Then you need correlational research. The goal here is to describe the strength of the relationship between two or more events or characteristics. How strongly are they associated?
How is that measured?
Usually with a statistic called the correlation coefficient. It's a number ranging from -1.00 to +1.00.
What do the numbers mean?
A number close to +1.00 indicates a strong positive correlation as one variable increases. The other tends to increase, like maybe steady time and grades. A number close to -1.00 indicates a strong negative correlation as one increases. The other tends to decrease, like maybe permissive parenting and self-control. A number near zero means little or no association.
So correlations let us predict things.
Yes, the stronger the correlation, positive or negative, the better we can predict one variable from the other.
Okay, here comes the crucial part I remember you mentioning. Correlation does not equal causation. This is huge, right? Especially when reading news headlines about research.
Absolutely vital. Cannot stress this enough. Just because two things are correlated, it does not mean one causes the other.
Give that permissive parenting example again.
Okay. Finding a negative correlation between permissive parenting and child self-control doesn't prove permissive parenting causes low self-control. Maybe it's the other way around. The child's lack of self-control caused the parents to become permissive. They gave up. Or maybe a third factor we didn't measure, like genetics or family stress or poverty, is causing both the parenting style and the child's behavior.
The hidden third variable.
Exactly. So correlation shows an association, a link, but it can't tell you about cause and effect. Always question causality when you only see correlational data.
So how do researchers determine cause and effect if correlation isn't enough?
For that, you need an experiment. An experiment is a carefully regulated procedure where the researcher manipulates one or more factors they believe influence the behavior being studied while holding all other factors constant.
Manipulation and control.
Okay.
The factor that is manipulated is called the independent variable. It's the potential cause. The behavior that is measured to see if it changes as a result of the manipulation is the dependent variable. It's the effect.
So back to testing that new literacy program. The program itself, whether kids get it or not, is the independent variable.
Right, you manipulate who gets the program. And the students' reading scores afterwards would be the dependent variable.
Perfect. You measure reading scores to see if they depend on which program the kids received.
And how do you make sure it's the program causing the difference, not something else?
Two key things. First, you typically have an experimental group, gets the manipulated experience, the new program, and a control group. Treated identically, except they don't get the manipulation. Maybe they get the standard program. Second, and this is critical, you use random assignment. Participants are assigned to either the experimental or control group purely by chance. This helps ensure the groups are as similar as possible to begin with, reducing the chance that pre-existing differences between the groups are responsible for the results.
So, random assignment and comparing experimental control groups let you isolate the effect of the independent variable.
That's the goal. It allows researchers to make much stronger claims about causality. This is really the gold standard for determining if educational interventions, teaching methods, or other factors truly cause a change in children's development or learning.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground theories, research, but ultimately, all this knowledge points towards one critical goal, doesn't it? Improving children's actual lives.
Absolutely. That's the driving force behind the research.
So, based on all this understanding, what are some of the key areas where researchers see children needing support? Where can this knowledge make a real difference, especially for educators?
Yeah, several areas consistently emerge as crucial focus points. First, health and well-being. This is fundamental. Questions like, what are the real dangers of prenatal exposure to substances? How significantly does diet impact a child's ability to concentrate and learn in school? Are kids getting enough exercise? And what are the consequences if they aren't? What factors contribute to substance abuse in adolescence?
So physical health directly impacts everything else.
Definitely. Health professionals increasingly recognize how lifestyles and even psychological states profoundly affect physical health, which in turn affects a child's ability to engage fully in education and life.
Okay, what else?
Parenting. This is obviously huge. It brings up lots of complex, sometimes controversial questions in today's society. Can children thrive equally well with gay parents versus straight parents? What's the impact on kids when both parents work outside the home? Does physical punishment like spanking have long-term negative effects? How does divorce impact children?
Tough questions with huge implications.
Right. Understanding the research on these diverse influences helps us support children navigating all sorts of family structures and challenges, and it helps educators partner effectively with parents.
And education itself, of course.
A massive area. There's widespread agreement, at least in the U.S., about the need to improve schools, but how? Debates rage about accountability, how best to measure student learning and teacher effectiveness. What should the curriculum cover? Just core academics, or should schools focus more on the whole child, including social-emotional learning? How do we best challenge students without discouraging them?
These are the daily questions teachers grapple with.
Exactly. And finally, we absolutely must consider sociocultural contexts and diversity. Health, parenting, education, none of these happen in a vacuum. They're all deeply shaped by context.
You mean things like culture, ethnicity?
Precisely. We need to pay close attention to. Culture, those shared behavior patterns, beliefs, values passed down through generations. Ethnicity, shared heritage, nationality, race, religion, language. Socioeconomic status, SES, grouping people by occupation, education, economics, which involves inherent inequalities in resources and opportunities. And gender, the characteristics society defines as male or female, and the differing expectations and experiences that often come with that.
These factors create vastly different realities for children, even within the same classroom.
Immensely different. And when you look globally, the impact of these contexts becomes even more stark.
You mentioned the data on girls' education.
Yes, historically, UNICEF data showed significantly fewer girls than boys globally ever got any formal education, especially in places like sub-Saharan Africa. Even relatively recently, there were tens of millions more boys than girls enrolled in primary and secondary schools worldwide.
That reflects deep cultural norms about gender roles.
Absolutely. And it has profound consequences. But it also highlights resilience and change. Remember Dolly Akhtar in Bangladesh?
The teenager fighting child marriage.
Yes. Living in a slum where early marriage was common, she formed a group, supported by UNICEF, to advocate for hygiene and, crucially, to convince parents to keep girls in school rather than marrying them off young. She used her understanding of the context to challenge those norms. It shows how individuals can make a difference within these larger systems.
That story brings up a really important point. Given all the potential challenges, poverty, discrimination, difficult family situations, some children still manage to thrive. They overcome adversity. What's the secret to resilience?
Resilience is a fascinating and vital concept. It's generally defined as the ability to adapt successfully and develop confidence despite facing significant adversity or negative stereotypes. Think back to Alice Walker overcoming poverty, racism, injury.
So what helps children be resilient? Is it just something they're born with?
Research suggests it's a combination of factors. Resilient children often do possess certain individual characteristics. Good intellectual functioning helps with problem solving. An appealing, sociable, easygoing disposition tends to elicit more positive responses from others. They often have higher self-confidence and may have particular talents that give them a sense of mastery.
So individual traits matter. But what about their environment?
Crucially, their context also shows certain protective features. A consistent finding is a close relationship with at least one caring, competent parent figure. Authoritative parenting, which combines warmth and support with clear expectations and structure, is often linked to resilience.
Okay. What else in the environment?
Socioeconomic advantages certainly help buffer stress. Strong connections to supportive, extended family members or community networks, and really importantly, having bonds with caring, competent adults outside the family.
Like a teacher, a coach. a mentor.
Exactly. You, as an elementary educator, can be that crucial, caring adult for a child facing adversity. Attending effective schools that provide support and opportunities is also a major protective factor. Understanding these factors means you can actively look for ways to foster them in your students.
So it's not just innate toughness. The environment, the support systems are critical for building resilience. Society plays a role then.
Yes, a huge role, particularly through social policy. This refers to a government's course of action laws, programs, funding priorities designed to promote the welfare of its citizens, including children.
And policy is influenced by.
All sorts of things. The political system, societal values, economic conditions, lobbying, public opinion. It's complex. But the policies enacted have real consequences for children.
Like policies related to poverty.
That's a major one. We mentioned the high rates of child poverty in the U.S. compared to some other developed nations. Living in poverty exposes children to a cascade of stressors, family turmoil, instability, violence, crowding, poor housing, lack of resources. Research clearly shows this chronic stress impacts brain development and learning.
But can policy actually make a difference? Can it help foster resilience on a larger scale?
The evidence suggests yes, absolutely. Well-designed policies can make a real impact. Remember the Minnesota Family Investment Program, MFIP example?
The one that helped parents get jobs?
Yes. It aimed to increase employment and income for families on welfare. And the research found that when parents' incomes rose as a result of the program, their children benefited significantly. Their school achievement went up, and their behavior problems went down.
Wow. So supporting the parents financially directly helped the kids' outcomes.
Exactly. It demonstrates how wise social policies focused on supporting family stability and economic well-being can reduce stressors, improve children's lives, and foster the conditions necessary for resilience. It directly impacts the readiness and well-being of the students who will eventually walk into your classroom. It connects the macro system right back to the child's microsystem. #outro.
We have covered an incredible amount of ground today, haven't we? A real deep dive.
We really have.
From, how people even thought about childhood historically to that intricate dance of biological, cognitive, and socio-emotional processes shaping every single moment. We looked at the different periods of development, those big enduring debates like nature versus nurture, and importantly, how science actually figures all this out.
And how policies can shape children's lives based on that science.
Yeah. And we saw how theories from people like Erickson give you, as future educators, really concrete ways to think about the emotional and social needs of elementary kids, fostering that initiative, that industry.
Right. And how Piaget helps you understand how they're thinking at different ages, why those hands-on methods are so vital in those concrete operational years.
Definitely. And then Vygotsky and Bronfenbrenner reminding us powerfully about the huge impact of social interaction, culture, and all those interconnected environmental layers, family, school, community, society. It all matters.
It really paints the full picture, extending far beyond just the classroom walls.
And understanding these layers, from the immediate family right up to cultural values and government policies, it isn't just, interesting academic stuff. For anyone going into elementary education, it feels absolutely foundational.
It truly is.
It's about seeing each child not just as a student you need to teach reading or math to, but as this wonderfully complex, integrated individual, shaped by this whole web of influences, but also capable of incredible growth and, as we discussed, remarkable resilience.
So, for you, our future educators, as you prepare to step into your own classrooms, maybe consider this provocative thought to take away. How can truly understanding the interplay of all these complex developmental factors, especially those powerful mesosystem connections that bridge between home and school, how can that consciously inform your everyday interactions? How can you use this deeper knowledge to move beyond just teaching subjects and really work to foster their holistic growth, their confidence, their resilience in every way possible? Recognizing the whole child in their whole context and becoming that vital, supportive piece of their developmental system.